So normally on days when we have ceremonies and business to attend to, I try to write a shorter sermon, and I tried to write a shorter sermon. But just think how much better that food is going to taste once you get out there. Okay, so stop thinking about the food now. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. You know, I wish I knew you guys better. I wish I knew you with the depth that duration provides. I think that time opens us to understanding. And what I know mostly is how you represent yourselves to me and to each other. And that representation is more or less accurate with concern to who you really are deep down. So what I see is behavior and action and reaction and attitude. And while that is certainly not the whole of you, it does give me something to go on. But it's not enough. There is more to you than this, what you give to me to perceive. And there is still much of you that I understand only by context, composite, and my intuition. And intuition, I'm afraid, is merely assumption protected by doing away with the details. So I am your minister. And I'm left to make some assumptions about you in order to preach presumably deep into the clockwork of your heart. It's an inaccurate business. And if sin, as I mentioned in my last sermon, if sin is missing the mark, and I'm up here conducting soul force inaccurately, well, at least I'm an earnest sinner. And perhaps God willing, as the saying goes, sometimes I do hit the mark in spite of it all, but this is beginning to sound like a confession, and it's not. It may be, in fact, a preemptive defense, which is not my intent, and it's not really fair. My intent is actually transparency. My intent is to practice what I preach, and today I have the opportunity to do that while preaching. Transparency requires trust in each other. And actually, it's deeper than that. Transparency requires strength. Transparency requires trust in oneself. And that trust cannot be blind trust. It must be a trust built with eyes wide and hearts open to our own brokenness, observant of our own brokenness. Only then will we find the power of a survivor. And it is that power which allows us to forgive our brokenness and live with newfound strength by living into our vulnerabilities. And yet, despite that good news, despite that promise, we so often do just the opposite. The fact is that our culture, and we individuals that comprise it, go to enormous lengths to appear invulnerable. And of course, it's deeper than culture. We are genetically and evolutionarily shaped to hide our vulnerability. We wouldn't want any predators or enemies to ascertain the weakness in our abilities, be that a physical or psychological weakness. But the problem isn't so much trying to fool predators. I mean, survival is a decent enough justification for puffing one's chest, I think. The problem, rather, is twofold. One, we rarely find ourselves in survival situations, and yet still act as though we are constantly under threat in regards to creating the deception of invulnerability. Not that the goal is to walk around a blubbering wreck of weakness, of course. I mean, just the opposite of that. The second and more important problem, in which the first is actually rooted, is that we begin to present our own selves with this facade. We somehow need to believe the deception of our invulnerability ourselves, not just to convince a saber-tooth. We have bought our own fear-based BS. One implication is that in some way we consider ourselves our predator. We are our prey. In short, we are afraid of ourselves. And this fear, I think, at its most basic, its most fundamental is this. We are afraid that if we comprehend our own vulnerability, what we will comprehend is our destruction. And indeed, we may find ourselves destroyed. That's what we're afraid of. We are afraid that if we comprehend our own vulnerability, we will comprehend our destruction and may find ourselves destroyed. And this fear leads to self-deception and lends itself to denial. We deceive ourselves into thinking we must be immune to any defect in the constitution of our character, and we deny our weaknesses. Let me clarify. I'm not saying that I am in denial, that I can no longer run as fast as I once could. I can't. Right? That's not the kind of weakness I'm talking about. The kind of weakness I'm talking about is more akin to the brokenness I spoke to some weeks ago. It is a weakness of understanding, perhaps a weakness of courage, maybe of character. It may stem from the fact that we are in an impossible situation, yearning for connection in an ever-changing world. Whatever its origins, we are compelled to deny our brokenness, to cover it up and act as though it's not there. And this is madness. I mean it. Denial is one of the roots of schizophrenia and depression. It undermines self-worth. What's more is this particular denial is illogical. Most of this, after all, takes place prior to logic on a relatively unconscious level, right? It's also dangerous. You see, the tragic irony is that our fear of vulnerability and subsequent self-deceptions and denial sets us up for moments of excruciating revelation and a lifetime half-lived. It is an unwhole way of living. To make a pun, it is unwhole. Another irony. Weakness kept in denial is a kind of predator. So our fear actually is justified, just misplaced. We should be afraid of denial and self-deception and embrace our brokenness and thus live holistically. Instead, we are afraid of our brokenness and deceive ourselves into a stupor until one day, be it an onslaught or an accumulation of days, we are shocked into an awful confrontation with our worst nightmare, our whole selves. And this is painful. And you'll note that pain in the face of a facade of invulnerability produces anger. And that anger gets directed at the provocateur, or at oneself, or at those you love, or at all of these together. What's more, when you attempt to be invulnerable, you destroy hope. For hope is inherently vulnerable. When I say vulnerable, it does not mean only living into your woundedness, your brokenness. It also means living into your aspirations. Evaluating your aspirations is an interesting way of looking at your brokenness. So I ask you, what are your aspirations? What are you not that you want to be? Where are you hurt that you want to heal? Where do you find yourself deficient? Not so you could rake yourself over the coals about it, so that you can trust yourself. So let me attempt to set the pace here. I'll tell you what I want. I want to live a life of seamless integrity. I want to live a life that manifests my values. I want to be an urban farmer. I want to acquire wisdom, my own wisdom. I want to be a hero. I want to have the newsletter column finished. I want to feel deep satisfaction with my relationships to people and my environment. I want my security to be based on a profound understanding of life and death and suffering and peace. And from that you can, at least in degrees, deduce where I find myself wanting. I don't live a life of seamless integrity. I don't live a life that manifests my values. I am not an urban farmer, nor am I a hero. I do not have enough wisdom, much less my own wisdom. I have not finished the newsletter article. I do not feel deep satisfaction with my relationships to people and my environment. And my security is not based on a profound understanding of life, death, suffering, and peace. To face all that, to pursue that, to be open to all that and more, I decided to become a minister. It's one of the reasons. That place, those desires, are where I want this career to take me. This position requires authenticity, and so I am compelled by my profession toward the vision of myself that is my heart's hope. And it's the same for you. And if you don't know it, you need to know it. I'm not so much talking about your occupation, necessarily, as I am talking about your congregation. And here's one of those assumptions, or intuitions, I spoke of earlier. See, I don't know that you come here to have your values changed by participating in community. More likely, your values are confirmed, perhaps expanded on and fleshed out by being here. Most Unitarian Universalists have their, so to speak, conversion experiences prior to walking into one of our sanctuaries. Now, I assume that you come here for the same reason that I stand before you. at least in part, and likely in large part, whether consciously or not, you come here to be held accountable, to be inspired and supported to pursue the best of you, and to test that in community. That's a noble, noble idea, but it can't happen until you embrace your brokenness, until you delve into your vulnerability and find that in the end you are more refreshed by living with your heart open than you are by living in denial. Perhaps a good question to ask yourself is, what are you afraid of? Believe it or not, this is a key component to the question I keep asking you all. Where do you want West Valley Unitarian Universalist Church to take you? So, what is West Valley Unitarian Universalist Church afraid of? If you expose that fear and your fear, and find that you still live, you may then be more unguarded in your answer. Unbuckle your dreams. Where do you want West Valley to take you? Let your heart flutter. Where do you want this place to take you? How do you want this place to shape you? When you answer these questions, your church will be designed. When you answer these questions, when you answer from a fearless place, a place where your brokenness is acknowledged and therefore powerless over you, when you answer these questions, the answer to other, more mundane questions will become more clear. For instance, stewardship campaign is ramping up, and you are going to have to ask yourself how much money you wish to give to this endeavor we call church. And it occurs to me that church finances are a topic about which there is a fair bit of denial. Laughter in a Unitarian church is like amen in a Southern Baptist church. And just like the script reads, when we are presented with church finances, we become uncomfortable. And some may even get irritated. Fair enough. But I wager a more open-hearted approach, which in this case means a familiarity with the frailty of our finances, may yield not heartache, but health. I predict that it will yield authenticity and powerfulness. Our church, which is to say our communal finances, are a place where we are vulnerable, where we are broken, where we may possibly be broke. I joke. Not really. It's true, but I'm kidding. So here's a place where we're vulnerable, where many of us may be in denial. But believe it or not, here is an opportunity for you to begin pursuing the question of where do you want West Valley Unitarian Universalist Church to take you. When you consult your treasure, your talent, and your time to determine how much of each you wish to give to this church, do so with this question in mind. Where do you want West Valley Unitarian Universalist to take you? Where do you want your vulnerability to take you? For if this is not a place where we can be vulnerable, where we can address brokenness full-heartedly, then we need to make it so. You see, a full life, I think, is a life lived authentically and in connection with, but not attachment to, your environment and the people and beings in it. And there is no authenticity without going through vulnerability. In fact, I think that you will find that in the end, what makes you vulnerable makes you beautiful. May it be so. If you will stand as you are willing and able. Hymn number 131 will be our closing hymn today. Love will guide us. So what I said in the announcements is true. Your brain and your gut are connected. And so when I ask you, where do you want West Valley UU to take you, right now you're probably thinking to lunch. And that's great. But remember when you are eating, remember, let it be a memorial too. Remember the question as you eat. Bless you.
A very special postlude today. You will be expected to be the choir in this case. The words have been provided for you in your order of service, the insert. And this is a long one too, so brace yourself. How am I doing? Okay. No, just do that again and I'll be okay. I am the very model of a modern Unitarian, far broader than a Catholic, Hindu, Jew, or Presbyterian. I know the world's religions and can trace their roots historical, from Moses up to Channing, all in order categorical. I'm very well acquainted too with theories theological. On existential questions I am always wholly logical. About most any problem I am teeming with a lot of views. I'm full of fine ideas that should fill our empty church's pews. Church's empty pews, we're full of fine ideas that should fill our church's empty pews. We're full of fine ideas that should fill our church's empty pews. I quote from Freud and Jung and all the expert psychologists. logical. I'm anti-nuke, I don't pollute, I'm chastely ecological. In short, in matter spiritual, ethical, material, I am the very model of a modern Unitarian. In short, in matter spiritual, ethical, material, I am the very model of a modern Unitarian. I use the latest language. God is never Father or the Lord, but ground of being, source of life, or almost any other word. I never pray, I meditate, I'm leery about worshiping. I serve on 10 committees, none of which accomplish anything. I give to worthy causes and I drive a gas-conserving car. I have good UU principles, although I'm not sure what they are. I'm open to opinions of profound or broad variety, unless they're too conservative and smack of righteous piety. Unless they're too conservative or smack of righteous piety. Unless they're too conservative or smack of righteous piety. Unless they're too conservative or smack of righteous piety. I formulate agendas and discuss them with the best of them. Don't ask me to implement, we leave that to the rest of them. In short, in matters spiritual, ethical, material, I am the very model of today's religious liberal. In short, in matters spiritual, ethical, material, we are the very model of today's religious liberal. Lunchtime.